become available. Now, the commander of the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet has called for more aircraft carriers in the Pacific to dissuade China and Russia from conflict, while the Pentagon plans to improve airfields and Guam in Australia, further fueling tensions between China and the U.S. RT's Trinity Chavez has more on this story.
Today, U.S. officials calling for more aircraft carriers in the Pacific to thwart China. According to the Wall Street Journal, the commander of the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet has called for more aircraft carriers in the Pacific to dissuade China and Russia from conflict. Vice Admiral Carl Thomas spoke Tuesday as the U.S., Japan, Australia, Canada, and Germany completed a 10-day naval exercise led by Japan in the Pacific waters. The South China Sea in particular has been a major arena for confrontation between China and the U.S. Beijing also embroiled in a series of territorial disputes with members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and has been building up its military infrastructure in recent years. This while a Pentagon review of military resources worldwide plans to make improvements to airfields in Guam and Australia to counter China, expanding a previously announced deployment of fighter and bomber aircrafts. Still, though, defense officials say the so-called Global Posture Review contains no major shakeup of forces as the U.S. moves to take on Beijing while deterring Russia and fighting terrorism in the Middle East and in Africa. And amid growing tensions between the United States and China, the two countries are also engaged in an arms race to develop the most lethal hypersonic weapons as Beijing and Washington build and test more high-speed next-generation arms. The U.S. Air Force Secretary said on Tuesday, quote, "There is an arms race not necessarily for increased numbers, but for increased quality. It's an arms race that has been going on for quite some time. The Chinese have been at it very aggressively." Earlier this month, satellite images appear to show China has built mock-ups of a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier and destroyer in its northwestern desert. And in October, top U.S. official military officer General Mark Milley confirmed a Chinese hypersonic missile test that military experts say appears to show Beijing's pursuit of an Earth-orbiting system designed to evade American missile defense.
This year, the Pentagon has held several hypersonic weapons tests with mixed success. Hypersonic weapons travel in the upper atmosphere at speeds of more than 5 times the speed of sound, or about 3,800 miles per hour. Russia has also successfully tested a hypersonic weapon. For In Question, Trinity Chavez, RT.
And joining the conversation now, our panel today, former UK MP George Galloway and New York Times best-selling author and president of the Schlafly Eagles, Mr. Ed Martin is here. I have to say, you guys are probably my favorite panel. Good to see you both. Ed, to you first. Vice Admiral Carl Thomas not only called for more aircraft carriers into the Pacific to dissuade China, but he threw Russia in there too. What's going on here?
Well, it's just pure politics. I mean, look, we've now seen the Biden administration slide into Obama territory in terms of politicizing everything. No admiral is going out and holding a press avail like this one did without direction from the top, and not just the Pentagon, from the White House. So the question you have to ask is this valuable? You know, I'm a guy who subscribes to military superiority. The late Phyllis Schlafly, you mentioned, used to talk about that and write about it. We want to have the best military, better than anybody else, so that we're able to protect our friends and everybody knows it. But it's a different thing to go out and start taunting people and why they're doing it. And the reason why, in my opinion, the Biden administration is doing it now is they're desperate to change the conversation. They do know that the American people are uneasy about China, the communist regime. They do know that that consensus is building in America. So they're trying to ride that wave. And look, I would too if I were them, since inflation's about to explode and the economy's in the tank and Biden can't function. So, but this is very dangerous because China's not, China, I hate to say it, China's not Afghanistan, and we didn't do well in Afghanistan either. So it's a dangerous game.
Yeah, fair enough. George, you know, since the late 20th century, it seems like the U.S. has consistently been engaged in war somewhere with someone. Now that Afghanistan has fallen and U.S. troops are out, from an international perspective, does it appear that the U.S. is trying to provoke China?
Well, you'd have to be a certain age, and if you were, you might call this the Galloway and Martin laugh-in. But this is no laughing matter. It's a bitterly cold winter, which ought to be a moment to pause and reflect on Napoleon and Hitler's decision to fight wars on two fronts. The decision of the White House, and I agree, it's not the Pentagon. This is all a diversion from the abysmal failure of the Biden White House, the plummeting opinion poll ratings, the prospects for the United States are not good. So, hey, look over there. In fact, look over there in two places. We've got two enemies, both of them hypersonically nuclear-armed superpowers. Anyone who wants to go down this shipping lane or this path needs their head examined. I tell you, this would be the last war, and the United States and its allies would not win it. Ed says he wants military superiority. This is Dr. Strangelove territory. There is no more military superiority. As the ragged-assed men in sandals, otherwise known as the Taliban, just showed the United States in the last couple of months. It's as if that's been consigned to the memory hole. So wake up, America. This path leads to perdition.
George, that's quite chilling when you put it that way. Ed, I want to ask you something very domestic in policy. So for decades, Republicans had been branded as war hawks. But here, the White House, the Senate, the House are all Democrat-led, yet there appears to be no difference in foreign policy. Is that a fair assessment?
Well, I think it's a fair assessment that what Eisenhower warned about when he said the military, beware of the military-industrial complex, has come true in spades. I mean, what we have in this country is gazillions of dollars being spent out of Washington by both parties. And one of the dominant forces every year is arms and defense sales. That's just the facts. I don't have to argue that. We know that. The question is, how do you reverse that? That's what Donald Trump was trying to do. And to be honest, Donald Trump was trying to do it with a policy of not fighting wars all over the world. He still was spending a ton of money on defense. In fact, way more than I would have liked. But the reality is, what's going to change it? It's not Biden. Biden is not going to be. Biden wants all this action because he wants to be a president who has action and can be a leader and all that. So this whole mindset is bipartisan. I will say one thing with George, to argue with him. The communist regime is different than anywhere else. They shouldn't be lumped with Russia. That's not fair to Russia. But the communist regime and the size and scope of their economy and the control they have, the next era of competitive military superiority is in space. If you control space, you will control the world. I don't think America wants to control space. We never have to control the world, to dominate the world. But I think the communist regime does. So you've got some real tensions going on here. But in Washington, it's both parties, the establishments that love the money, love the action, and that's what we're seeing again. And the question is, who will stop it?